All right, we got Martin Day versus Anderson dos Santos. So Martin Day is 8-4. Anderson dos Santos 20-8. Martin fighting out of the U.S. Anderson out of Brazil. Oh, by the way, if you guys see that I am giving some information and not giving other information, like for each fight, it's because I'm testing the waters on what I want to talk about or how I want to present the fighters. So if you notice, I'm not saying all the same stats for all the different fights, and it's just because I'm testing the waters on how I want to do this. So just disclaimer. So on to it. Martin Day, Anderson dos Santos. Okay, so Martin Day, he's pretty dangerous, but he's not so great when it comes to the defensive side of things. However, he's kind of like the opposite of Dalby. He looks good even when he loses, whereas Dalby loses a fight after looking good. Do you know what I mean? So there are fighters where, you know, it's a close thing. I do this all the time. If I bet on somebody and I see they give it their all and they lose, I don't feel sour about that bet. Because I look at them, I'm like, you know what? They may have lost. I may have lost money on them, but they tried. And that's the important thing. So the problem here is that Day has had 3 UFC fights. No, 2 UFC fights. This is going to be his third. And he lost his last 2 UFC fights. Prior to that, he was on a 3-win fight streak. But those wins, once again, were not in the UFC. Most of his fights will either go to decision or they will end with punches. And I don't mean the fights that he loses. Like, the fights that he wins are included in this. The good thing about Day is that he once again has had variety in the way that he's won. So he's done things like a spinning kick to the body, and then he's also done like one by KO, one by punches. He's even had a verbal win. Heck, he's even won by standing guillotine choke. And I gotta give him props for all those wins, but once again, they're against guys like, for example, the standing guillotine choke, the guy he was facing was 0-4. One of his other fights, the one by verbal, was the guy had never fought before. He had no fights. If you track this data, the fighters that do this, the fighters that fight lesser competition always, tend to do horrible in the UFC down the road. Whereas the fighters who actually try to fight competitive fighters, even if they lose, in the long run tend to do better. It's a weird stat, but it's true. I find it to be true, and it helps me make my picks. So here, for example, I think a lot of people would be high on Day. You know, they think he's got a better chance and all this jazz, but man, look at Anderson dos Santos. Let's take a look here for a sec, because people forget. This guy, he's only a few years older than Day, but he has many more fights. He's 20-8. 20 wins, 8 losses. Now, that's not the best record, but it's not the worst. It really isn't. 20 wins, 8 losses? The only downside is that he's lost his last 2 fights. Against Andre Ewell, who won his last fight, and Nad Narimani. Both of those losses were by unanimous decision. Prior to that, he was on a 3-fight win streak, so he's actually won 3 of his last 5 fights, sorry. The problem here that I see is as soon as he went into the UFC, once again, loss, back to back. Is he going to come back from that? Who knows? But he's fighting a guy who has far fewer fights and a record that's 8-4. Overall, these guys' records kind of match up to each other. And that's where my split, as far as my mind goes, to who to pick. Now, here's what I got to say. Martin Day, if this stays standing, he might have a better chance. I think he's got the skill advantage. So, like, Day looks really good. Like, as I said, he's got these spinning back kicks. He's got, like, all these different ways to win. He actually likes back, like, spinning kicks for some reason. I noticed that, too. So, you could imagine, like, he's very fluid in his movement, probably. But that's where it becomes a problem for him defensively. Anderson, on the other hand, I don't think he's going to keep this game standing. He knows that Day is going to try to kick him. Day is going to go for the punches. So that tells me that Day probably doesn't have that great ground game. Santos does. Both of these guys are on their 2-fight losing streak, but they've both also won 3 of 5. So this is what I'm finding with the UFC. They're like putting people who have identical records together and think it's a match. You know? And then people look at the fighters and like, oh yeah, like Day is expected to win because he's got overall the better skill set, this and that. Well, does he? Does he really? Because he's fought twice in the UFC and he's lost. And sure, you could say the same is for Dos Santos, but Dos Santos has more experience. But then you look at the rest of Dos Santos's losses. You know, he's lost by choke, he's lost by punches, he's lost by KO, a lot of chokes and KOs there. And then you go to Day, as I mentioned, and, you know, there's those guillotine chokes in there. There's spinning kicks, you know, spinning back kicks, punches, and more KOs. The trade-off here between these two fighters is that Day has to keep it standing and striking. And obviously Dos Santos has to probably take it to the ground if he wants to win the fight, right? Day will have more variety of chances of winning, but Dos Santos has the experience of many more fights, like more than double in fights, right? Because Martin Day has had a total of 12 fights. Dos Santos has, I think, like 28 or 30. If you want to go with experience, then you go with Dos Santos if you think he could take Day down. If you don't think he could take Day down, then you go with Day. You might even want to take, take it so it doesn't go the distance. In this fight, I think it's going to be a really tough pick. I think it's going to be closer than people assume. I'm going to give it to Martin Day, just simply because I feel like he's got a bit more to prove. And who knows, maybe Dos Santos is just beat up from having so many fights, right? His fight record, like Dos Santos's fight record, kind of gives me the opinion that he's not too skilled when it comes to fight IQ. Maybe he rushes things a bit and then gets caught with those guillotines and such. So for this fight, I'm going to go with Martin Day.